Hi, I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nick Nicholas.
And this is From Akron and Beyond.
Nick and Bob's Top 10, Part 2.
Okay, well, my number 5 could probably be higher on my list, but I'm happy with where it is. It's Remain in Light by Talking Heads. Now, Talking Heads are probably like my favorite band, meaning that like a band that like hit me at exactly the right age, and every one of their albums as it came out I thought was just like an epic event. And that was the case for their first 5 albums. You have 77, you have More Songs About Buildings and Food, which is even better. You have Remain in Light, which is even better than those first 2. And then you have Remain in Light, which is the best. And an album, talk about sui generis. Nothing sounded like this album when it came out by Talking Heads or by anybody else. And nothing really sounds like it to this day. It was put together through long jam sessions produced by Brian Eno. And then they ended up, turning these into songs and editing all of the music very freely so that they're all kind of like perfect jams. It has Adrian Belew on it on guitar with some of the most mind-blowing guitar solos you'll ever hear. Once in a Lifetime, of course, is the hit off of that album, a great song. But every song on it's great, and it's one of those albums that really almost demands to be played in its entirety. I mean, you just need to, listen to it from beginning to end because everything fits together so well in it. So, yeah, Talking Heads, Remain in Light.
Did you ever see them live?
Oh, I did indeed. That's one of my... It's arguably my number 1 concert of all time. I saw them twice. I saw them at the Old Agora, when Remain in Light was the tour. And then working at a record store, I was able to get literal front row tickets when they played Blossom. And it turned out that Blossom show was what was going to turn into the Stop Making Sense tour. So in other words, no one had any idea. So when the show began, David Byrne comes out by himself with an acoustic guitar and a boombox, and it all builds up with one member after another coming out. No one had ever seen anything quite like it. Yeah. And by the end, it was just, this like orgiastic dancing freak show that was phenomenal. Yeah. It was, a fantastic concert.
Great band.
Yeah.
Well, my next is
number 4.
Yeah, Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers.
Nice.
And it wasn't like a real first album. It was a compilation of things, that
that violates the list rule.
No, they were never released. Different demos.
All right.
Different studio demos.
Well, since it's Jonathan, we'll let you pass.
Yeah. And you know what? One quick interesting story from the kid from Akron here. I was visiting a friend of mine who lived in Boston at the time, Meg Keane, who went on one of the Pretenders albums featured one of her songs called A Hymn to Her. She was a childhood friend of Chrissie Hynde. But anyway, I was staying with her, and she had a boyfriend. I can't think of his last name. The first name was Rolf, and he wanted to he was in this band he was really excited about. So took a subway and went to a rehearsal in an old, like a brownstone somewhere in Boston. And it was the first version of the Modern Lovers. They had a drummer who was like a medical student, and he had to go back to medical school somewhere in Scandinavia. And, how did I know that I was watching a rehearsal of what was going to be one of my all-time heroes, and he just played for me, for like an hour. They did all these great songs that were later I would discover on this album when it finally came out. And we just had these great conversations, everything from he hated, blues, and he thought Jimi Hendrix was a dirty guitar player. And he was talking about Jewish mystics and kids being drunk on drugs. But he was just doing all this great, pure, rock and roll. And he was imitating Nico at one point, But anyway, so I was always, a friend of mine, Tom Barkukas, who lived in Boston, would keep me informed of the different things that Jonathan was doing, but nothing ever got released. And all these demos that he'd done over the years, I think John Cal did some demos, and Kim Fowley, who later on helped the Runaways, did some demos, and an independent record label called Berserkly released, the album. It's at one point featured Roadrunner and Pablo Picasso that the Bizarros still do, to this day. But that was a very important album once it came out.
Right. Well, it was kind of like a pre-punk album that got lost because it never was released until the punk stuff kind of started to happen.
And it was really appreciated by everybody once they got it.
Yeah, the Sex Pistols covered Roadrunner, But, that's a great album. And I love Jonathan Richman, too. He's one of my all-time favorites.
And we saw him a few months ago.
Yeah, we did. Nick and I saw him up in Cleveland. It was he puts on a very fun show, always worth seeing. That album would be an obvious pick, I think. He's not on my list, but the album Jonathan Sings is one that I'm
that's a
particular favorite of mine as well. There's so many good songs on it.
Back to in his childlike stage.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's not a hard rock,
Well, no, the famous story, not to get too far off track here, but the famous story on Richmond was he was playing, this rock music and very influenced by the Velvet Underground. He loved the Velvet Underground.
Hung out with him. He worshipped them.
Yeah, he's that documentary that Todd Haynes made. He's in it, prominently in it, interviewed in it. But he eventually decided that he didn't want to play any music that he could. The famous quote was that he couldn't play at a kindergarten or at a nursing home. And so his drummer was Dave Robinson, who later became the drummer for the Cars. And he ultimately quits because Jonathan is making him put towels on all of his drums and only bring a snare and a kick drum and a cymbal, and he's like, okay, this is ridiculous. Yeah. Speaking of Talking Heads, Jerry Harrison.
That's what I was just going to say.
Was in the original Modern Lovers, and then he, of course, left for Talking Heads. But so the later Jonathan Richman stuff is very different, but
beautiful.
But a lot of it's great. Yeah. So anyway, that's obviously I'm not arguing with that pick. That's a good one.
Better not.
I called this number 3 times already today, but I got scared. I put it back in place. Yeah, I am straight, and I want to take it late.
My number 4 is an album that everyone knows, I think. It's the Beatles. And the title of the album officially is The Beatles, but we know it as the White Album. A la the Stones, the Beatles are a group that I could have easily probably have just said, well, they're the Beatles. How am I going to name one album? But I love the White Album. And I still play it with some regularity. And the thing that I love about it is the thing that most of its critics always complain about, which is all the little tunes that are on it that, break up the album. To me, I love that. I love the flow of it.
Yeah.
And people will sit there, the White Album would have been a great single album if they'd left off Wild Honey Pie. Why do you need that on there? Well, you need it on there because it's just part of the experience. It's just fun. And I mean, everything from like, you know, Dear Prudence to Revolution Number 9.
Yeah.
I like it, man. I mean, I just like the way it flows, that whole record.
I agree.
And there's such beautiful songs on it. A favorite moment of mine on that album is on side 2. It ends side 2, and it's Paul McCartney writes the ultimate Paul McCartney song, which is I Will, which is just, it's not his best song by any means, but it's just a simple love tune, you know, who knows how much I love you. You know, I mean, it's just, you know, very melodic, very sweet. And yet has Paul's typical production genius in that there's no bass guitar on that song. The bass parts to that are all a low vocal singing the bass part, which I did not know for, I think, 30 years. Someone finally told me that, and I was
funny.
like, wow, that blows my mind. And then the next song that ends the side 2 is Julia by John Lennon,
of course.
which is, of course, the beautiful song to his mother. And those two songs, to me, I just think they both epitomize those two geniuses, right? Because the one is this personal song that's so touching and tear-jerking almost, and the other one is this pure pop confection that you can say is easy to do, but give it a shot, see if you can pull it off. You know, McCartney's a genius at that. But those are just two songs of many great songs
Beautiful
on that album. Yeah.
You know what? This has nothing to do with our show today, but you were mentioning the Paul McCartney. You know, the other day I heard you guys here at the station, you played McCartney's theme from the James Bond movie,
Live and Let Die.
And that opening line, when you were young and your heart was an open book, you used to say, live and let live. We ought to do a show just James Bond.
There's a lot of good music there. Yeah.
Who knows how long I've loved you? You know I love you still. Will I wait a lonely lifetime if you
All right. Well, this is From Akron and Beyond. I am Bob Ethington with my buddy and co-host Nick Nicholas, and we are exchanging our all-time top 10 album list. And we are now to our final 3, Nick. So this is very excitement. What?
I think we miscounted. I got 2.
I have 3 left. My list is better. It's bigger.
Well, maybe I left one off.
You
What
must
you
have.
got? You top 11?
No, you must have left one out.
Well, let's see where this goes. The next one is, you know, you'd expect this of me, Captain Beefheart, Trout Mask Replica.
Okay. Well, go
Yeah,
with
it was
your...
the first double album I think either that or Love, one of Love's double albums. Anyway, it was probably the first double album I bought. It was on Frank Zappa's Straight label. And what can you say about Captain Beefheart? Don Van Vliet. I mean, he was a kid genius who, you know, his poetry and his crazy saxophone solos, and he had this compilation of musicians like no other. And they just, you know, the stuff that they played, they could actually recreate it, play the same thing again, and it would just sound like chaos to a lot of people. But
I didn't realize until some years later that it wasn't chaos. I thought it was amazing chaos.
Same here.
But I had no idea that all of that music was completely written out.
And he got mad if you made a mistake, and he could tell. How can you tell if Zoot made Zoot Rollo screwed up? You know?
I know. I mean, no one else would be able to know. That's for sure.
Rock and Morton.
Nick, let me see your list.
Yeah,
Talking about Captain
What was
Beefheart.
the octave range of Captain Beefheart?
Oh, it was huge. I know. It was like operatic singer.
And he just sounded like he was just the vocal range, you know, whether it was a blues kind of a song or, it was just pretty good. Bob's looking at my. I
found his lost album.
God, Etherington's correct. I left off a song that left something out. All right. Well, that's a good. Anyway, Captain Beefheart, Trout Mask Replica. I had his his first couple albums before, but this put it all together. It was nothing like it.
Right. And never, even after that, nothing that he did was really quite like that either. Produced by Frank Zappa, oddly enough. Although my understanding is that Zappa basically just gave him the studio.
Oh, yeah. How could you produce?
Let him do it. Yeah.
How could you produce? Oh, yeah. I remember I read a couple books on Captain Beefheart. I remember a couple of his bandmates said he was a genius, but when it came to paying the band at the end of the night, he couldn't count.
Moonlight on Vermont.
All right, my number 3 is Bringing It All Back Home by Bob Dylan. Okay, now Bob Dylan is my single favorite artist of all time, along with Miles Davis. And so it was very hard to pick one album by him. I could easily have come up with at least another 4 or 5 that could theoretically be equal. But Bringing It All Back Home is an album that I have found myself going back to more and more. I think of it as being the perfect album to if someone doesn't know who Bob Dylan is, I think this is kind of the perfect album to turn them on to Dylan with. If they don't like this album, they're not going to like Bob Dylan. It has, the first side is all electric, the second side is all acoustic, and it has some of his most epic songs. Mr. Tambourine Man, It's All Right Mom, Only Bleeding is on side 2. And side 1 has a couple of songs by him that I really love that are kind of just real pretty songs. She Belongs to Me is a song that I love that song. And then on side 1 of Bringing It All Back Home, of course it has Subterranean Homesick Blues, which is a classic, but it also has a couple of Dylan's most beautiful tunes and catchy tunes, one of which is She Belongs to Me. And the other one that I particularly love is a song called Love Minus Zero.
Oh, it's one of my favorites.
No Limit. Yeah, which just has beautiful lyrics and is a beautiful melody. And, I think a lot of people forget that song.
I always wanted the Bizarres to do that, but I was outvoted on it.
Yeah. It's a great song. So anyway.
It's funny that you mentioned, I love, when I at the beginning of the show, when I said there were so many great, talented, musicians but I love their work as a whole. Mm-hmm. And Dylan and Leonard Cohen, were in that list with me too. I would have picked Blonde on Blonde, but so many great records.
Right. Well, the run from, Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61 Revisited, Blonde on Blonde, that's nuts, yeah. And all recorded like in a year and a half, those 3 albums. That's amazing.
My love, she speaks like silence at my window with a broken wing.
That was my number 3, Nick. What you got?
The first Stooges album.
Okay.
It contained, so many great songs, but 1969, I Want to Be Your Dog. It was also produced by John Cale.
I was going to say another Cale production, yeah.
I mean, it was, bizarre. Once in a while we'll do I Want to Be Your Dog, a long version of that. But what a great album. I mean, it was nothing like that. It was just different.
It's
powerful and different.
I've come up before on the program. I lived in the Detroit area when those albums came out, when the Stooges albums came out, and I remember the freeform radio at the time. And the DJs would talk very freely about the local bands and always promote them and stuff. And when that album came out, they played it a lot. But I've always remembered this, and I was probably like in 6th grade, but I always remembered them saying, "Man, I don't know what this John Cale guy, whoever he is, did with the production, but he sure made them sound good. Because if you've ever seen these guys live, they don't sound anything like this live. They're not like the MC5. Those guys, they got it together. But it just cracked me up, because it was, that album's so good.
Yeah, it's good that you remember. That's so cool you remembered that.
And I'm thinking John Cale, we've mentioned him so many times on this episode. Yeah. He's probably, if he ever listens to this, he's going to be, how come none of my albums got on your list?
Oh man, now I feel bad. Go back.
Poor John Cale.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think this is my number 2. You should just have one left, Nick?
Yes.
Okay. All right. My number 2 is one that is one of those, I'm going to be unapologetic about it. Some people's eyebrows will raise, but I think that this is one of the 2 all-time greatest rock albums ever made. My number 1 is the other one.
1910 Fruca Company?
Oh, you're in the ballpark, Nick. Electric Warrior by T-Rex.
Oh, my wife will love that.
I love that album. I love T-Rex. I love all Mark Bolan stuff. I love the trippy, hippy-dippy stuff that he did early on in his career, and I love even a lot of the later stuff. The 2 albums, though, that are uncontestably his masterworks are this one and The Slider, which is a great album as well. But Electric Warrior wins just because every song on it is great. And talk about an album that nothing else sounded like. No one else really quite sounds like T-Rex on that album. His vocals are so odd. The production is so crisp and clear and rockin', but melodic. Everyone knows Bang a Gong, Get It On. That was the hit off of the album. But there's so many good songs on that record. The Motivator, Rip Off, which I actually got to do a cover of with Tin Huey at one show that we played. Yeah, I sang.
Local?
Yeah.
Locally?
Yeah, at the old Lime Spider. Yeah. I don't know. They lost a bet or something. They had to play that song. And Planet Queen, Cosmic Dancer. Oh man, I could literally name every song on the album. They're all terrific.
Remember years ago, probably 20 years ago, you were trying to get a lot of the Akron bands to do a cover album of you asked us to do it, but nothing ever came of it.
No, unfortunately. Yeah. And now there's been like 2 or 3 so that have been, nationally that have come out.
I actually bought one a couple years ago. I think I can't think of his name, who passed away. I think his name was Wilder. Was his last name?
No.
Wield. Anyway,
Okay.
Even Elton John did one of his songs.
Yeah, right. Oh, you're thinking of Hal Wilner.
Yeah.
Hal Wilner. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right, Nick.
Okay.
Number 1.
Well,
although it's not really your number 1.
It's not really, but it should be the Pretenders' first album.
All right, great.
And
great call.
It's album's like a drug. You hear that it's like Forever Changes, or some albums from start to finish. They put you in they create a mood, and from start to finish, and when it's over, it's like, wow, what did I just experience?
Right.
I mean, and she's from Akron.
Yeah.
And she's still doing great stuff. She's got one coming out in
soon,
officially in a few days.
Yeah. Well, the Pretenders and Chrissie Hynde have made a lot of great music and a lot of great records. I still think that first album's my favorite.
Me too.
Of everything they've done, just
Same
because
here.
It sounded so fresh.
Yep.
When it came out.
Yeah.
It rocked, but it had a lot of melody. Just everything about the sound, the guitar sound on it. It's just super cool.
I read an anecdote the other day, prepared for this show, where Nick Lowe produced Stop Your Sobbing that's on here. It's an old Kinks song.
Yeah.
and then he didn't want to do the rest of the album because he didn't think it was going to go anywhere.
Really?
Yeah, it was a quote actually in the
That was
Wikipedia.
Okay, well, that was a rare misstep by Nick.
Yeah, I mean, he's one, and that's another guy. I have all of his records.
Yeah.
How could you pick one? You know,
Right.
I mean, there's
No,
so many of those.
I know. It is impossible. So, okay, I guess I'm left with my number one, which is tied with the T-Rex album as, in my opinion, the greatest rock album ever made, and that is Funhouse by the Stooges, which I think is a perfect album. It begins with the song Down on the Street, which is at a very high level of rock intensity. And somehow after that, every song gets more intense until you're finally to, not quite finally. Then you're with the title track, Funhouse, which is just like wailing saxophone and just this crazy, like the rhythm is just nuts. And then it ends with the song called L.A. Blues, which is pure cacophony, absolute noise, and would be terrible on any other album, except it's the only fitting way to finish this album because the album has gotten so intense by that point. All you can really do is just let it just have this total atonal noise, and it's such a brilliant album. And I still remember the first time I played it. I bought it. I was a kid, and I put it on, and I could not believe how much I love that record. Just every song on it just was great. And the cover is great.
Yeah,
the cool photo and on the inside with them all on the
floor.
Yeah, like Persian carpet or whatever, and in the studio. And it's just such a dynamic album. And one thing about the Stooges I want to point out that is different than, they're considered one of the classic progenitors of punk rock, right? I mean, they're like, the grandfathers of punk or whatever. But the thing about the Stooges that is different from almost every other band is that, weirdly enough, they kind of swing. Their rhythms are not just like that bump, 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 bump stuff. No, not on these albums, not on the first one and not on the second. Okay. The rhythms sway. They have this kind of real kind of like dancey kind of thing to them. It's almost a little jazzy in a way. And I've read, Iggy Pop talk about that. And he said, well, I started as a drummer, and that was, to me, was always important, was to, keep this kind of rhythmic thing going with the music. So no matter how primitive and raw and seemingly simplistic some of the songs are, they're not really, because, you try playing those songs, with your band. They're not as easy to play as you might think. Just to catch that feel. It's about the feel that they have.
It's interesting when you mentioned the L.A. Blues, the way that ends that album, and then We Will Fall ends the first album, which is with John Cal playing the viola. I'm trying to think.
I think it ends for side one.
Yeah, but still, it's just things you wouldn't expect on both of their albums.
Right. That song, "We Will Fall." Yeah. We will fall. They did not fail. They, Iggy loved Jim Morrison, The Doors, and I always thought that song was a little like The End in a way. It kind of had that vibe to it.
That's cool. Yeah. I picked a first album. You picked a second one.
Yeah, and I think that's our only overlap on our list is the Stooges. I mean, as a band. But so. Oh, this has been fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if our listeners learned it. They've probably learned too much. We need to keep the mystery, maybe, Nick, a little bit more. But anyway,
nobody told me you had to count from the best to worst to the best, or not. You know what I mean?
I thought it went without saying, Nick, but I put all this work into that. You're just randomly choosing great albums. That's easy.
Well, that's why I did it. It was easy, so I agreed to it.
But no, I just, as a little postscript to this, I'm looking at like bands. King Crimson. How do I not have any King Crimson on my list?
Same here.
Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix. I love Jimi Hendrix. How did I don't know how that happened. The Kinks, the Byrds. This will drive you nuts. Steely Dan. I know you don't like them. I love Steely Dan, but to me, every one of their albums is great. I don't know which one I would pick.
It's not that I don't like them. It's just that they're just normal, average.
All right, whatever. You're wrong, but okay. Anyway, this has been From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington with Nick Nicholas. Hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we will see you next time.